Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marilyn Love, Hayes County Master Gardener. I'm about to take a stroll through the lovely Kyle Butterfly Garden, and I'm hoping you'll walk along with me as I point out a few of the wonderful hardy perennials growing here. Each one of these will attract butterflies and other pollinators. They're all either native or very well adapted to our part of Texas. Some of them have even been designated as Texas superstar plants, which means they'll do well all over Texas. So these are plants, if you choose them for your garden, that will give you a beautiful result with very little fuss. So I'm standing here at the entrance to the garden, and on my right is the first plant I want to point out to you. It's called Purple Trailing Lantana. It stays fairly low, only gets to be like maybe a foot tall, but over the years it'll spread farther and farther and trail to about a width of 6 feet even. This one's only about 1.5 years old, I think, and so it hasn't gotten quite that wide yet, but it will. You might notice the lovely purple flowers with the tiny little yellow dots. And this plant is going to bloom like this starting in April, and can even bloom to December if we don't have any frost nights before that. And it doesn't even always die back in the winter. Sometimes it stays green all winter. If we have a couple of nights of frost, then it may die back. And I'll talk to you in a little bit about what you do with all these perennials when they die back in the winter. So now let's move on into the garden. And the first plant we see as we walk in, straight in our face, is another lantana that does really, really well in Central Texas, as most lantana do. This is the new gold lantana. And just like the purple trailing lantana, it is a Texas superstar plant. It's very, very hardy. And one big plus for it is that the deer don't like it. They might nip the buds off and try the buds when you first plant it, but then they'll leave it alone. This plant can get to be up to 2 feet tall, and it also spreads or trails a little farther each year and can eventually get to be like 6 feet in width. So that's pretty cool. It will die back in the winter, and when that happens, you're going to cut it down to about 6 inches, and it will come back from its roots, as most perennials do. They come back from their roots. So you cut them back in the winter when the frost takes them down. Okay? Most lantanas do really well in Texas. These are just 2 that I wanted to point out to you. And now moving forward on my left, I see Katie's dwarf rualia, sometimes called dwarf Mexican petunia. And it's not going to get any taller than it is right now, like maybe 6 inches tall. Has this lovely dark green foliage and these pretty purple flowers. And this makes such an excellent border plant because it stays low. It doesn't always die back in the winter in Central Texas. If it does, you'll want to just trim it back, not to 6 inches because it's not much taller than that, but you'll want to trim it back to about 3 inches and then it'll come back. But it doesn't always die back either. Sometimes it stays green all winter and just may not bloom in the winter. But they have this as a border all along this nice curvy sidewalk with the bench. And it is also a Texas superstar plant. So it'll do great in your landscape. I'm moving on through, and I see on my right, I see Salvia greggi, sometimes called cherry sage. There are quite a few of them here. You can see that they've been blooming, so it's time to deadhead the spent blooms, and also sometimes in July and August it might look a little stressed when it's so hot and there hasn't been much rain. So you can take it down to about 1/4 if you want to shape it up. This one, the big advantage to this one is that it's evergreen. So it doesn't die back in the winter. So when you've cut back all your other perennials and everything looks pretty dead, this is green in your landscape, which is really nice to have a little greenery in the winter in your perennial landscape. This one's not a superstar, but it does super well in central Texas. It just can't take the cold in some of the more northern parts of Texas. Now, on my left is one of my absolute favorite plants. It's the Mexican bush sage. You see it has these tall purple spike flowers and the long pointed leaves. This plant has started blooming early, really, because it's going to really be blooming in July and August and probably even September. It's such a drought tolerant, heat tolerant plant. It can grow in full sun and just do really well. It will die back in the winter though, so you're going to want to cut it down to about 6 inches. And then, believe it or not, it'll just keep getting slightly bigger every year until it reaches a height of about 4 to 5 feet and about 5 or 6 feet in width. I actually see a bee on it right now, and the butterflies love it as well. So I see a little dragonfly on it too. So it definitely attracts your pollinators, which is what you're looking for in a butterfly garden. It's a superstar plant. Deer won't touch it. Deer don't like it. So that's a great advantage. Now I'm coming up upon here, kind of in the partial shade, the Greg's Mist flower, and there's actually a butterfly on one of the flowers right now. This has just started to bloom, and if you come here in July and August, it will be covered with blossoms and covered with butterflies. This is like butterfly attractor on steroids. The butterflies love this plant. It can be aggressive. It spreads by rhizomes or runners under the ground, and so every couple of years you're probably going to want to thin it out so that it's not just getting to be a big thicket in your garden. When you do that, you can replant the plants somewhere else or give them to a friend, right? So it's one of my favorites. It's not a superstar, but it does super well in our part of Texas. And like I said, #1 butterfly attractor that I've ever heard of. So great plant. Can take part shade too, so that's nice. There are so many pretty things here, it's hard to limit myself, but I'm doing that today. So now on my left, in this nice sort of shady part, which will probably be in the full sun later today, are the purple cone flowers. This is echinacea. You can see it has the seeds in the center and the lovely tall stalks with the purple flowers. This is also native to Texas. You would want to wait until the birds have dispersed or the wind has dispersed those seeds in the center when they dry out, and then you can cut the stalks back. With all of the plants, if you trim back the spent blooms, you're going to encourage more blossoms. So that's a really good technique to use. And all of these don't use very much water, but let me mention that that is until established. So what established means is that they need to have an established root system. So if you have planted one of these plants this spring or are planning to plant it this month, you're going to want to water it fairly regularly through this first summer because it won't have an established root system. After that, though, you'll be able to water it only if we go through one of those 60 days, no rain, over 100 degrees every day. Then you will have to water them like maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks once they're established, if that's the case. And then you can trim them back when they start to look a little stressed, and that will help them also. Okay. Some more Katie's Ruellia down here. Another lantana, a different one. Lots of pretty things here. Some more Salvia Gregi over here on the left that we talked about, the cherry sage. That comes in so many colors too. You can get that in such a variety of colors that it really helps you, design a color scheme in your garden. It comes in lots of different colors. White, red, purple, lipstick, which is a combination of white and red, so it's really cool. So the last one I wanted to talk about today is the Henry Dulberg salvia, which is here on my left. This is native to our part of Texas. You will find it growing in the fields in the spring because it's native to the Edwards Plateau and the Blackland Prairie, which is right where we live. So you can see it has these lovely purple blossoms. The butterflies and the bees love it. It's super hardy. It will start blooming in April, and if you cut off the spent blooms, it will continue to bloom all through the summer. It will die back in the winter, and so you'll cut it back. And also, as it goes through the summer, if you'll cut off the spent blossoms, like this one right here that's dried up, you could actually, they become so brittle, you can actually just snip them right off with your fingers. It's really easy. Then that will encourage them to keep blooming all through the summer. You might have to water these like you do the other perennials if we go through a really long stretch of no rain. You need to water them about once a month. So when you water any of these, let's water not too often, but really deep each time we water, okay? That will encourage our roots to grow deep into the ground, and they will have a better chance of surviving that way. So not too often, but really deep when you water, okay? So here's some more Henry Dulberg on this side. There's also some more lovely coneflower back there, and some more purple lantana up here in the front. So that's really the end of my little tour today. You can see that there were just so many other wonderful plants in here. I just didn't want to take the time to talk about all of them today. But the wonderful thing about them is that you can grow them with very little water, no fertilizer really. I don't fertilize ever. I just use some compost once or twice a year to help add a little organic material to the soil, a little nitrogen. And they also have very few pest and disease problems. So that means you don't have to use any chemical pesticides on them. And all of those features make them plants that are really easy to grow with what we call earth-kind gardening, which means that they are environmentally friendly practices. And you can see they yield a really beautiful result. And you're being nice to our environment at the same time. So here at the library, I'm going to leave a copy of this Texas Superstar book. It will have some of the superstars that I've pointed out to you, but it also includes Texas Superstar annuals, shrubs, trees, some vegetables, some fruits, all kinds of plants. And if you plant one of these, you can be pretty guaranteed that it's going to do well in Central Texas. And as you can see, there are a few other plants that do really well here that aren't on the Superstar list, but I pointed out a few of those to you. So come pick one of these up at the Kyle Library if you'd like to. And when you're here, take a stroll through the garden. So that's all for today. Happy gardening.